Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of Kinjals in Canada. The topic for today is Canadian food culture. This might seem innocuous and unrelated to the subject of culture regarding politics that I've promised to discuss. It's not. Food is extremely important in life, and the individual styles of food that different people around the world eat is a defining factor of culture. It's no different in Canada. Canada, being a young nation lacking the depth of history that our colonial ancestors might have enjoyed in their country of origin, has a food culture that seems unoriginal to many. Whether this be due to the diversity inherent to a nation of colonial origin, for example, foods would not be considered Canadian in Canada because they might be French or English in origin, or due to the existing food meta of the world at the time of Canada's founding, I do not know. When I say food meta, I'm referring to the fact that everybody came here with recipes passed down in their families and derived from earlier cultures. Those recipes form this kind of narrative of how you cook, the things that everyone can make off the top of their head. Like a lot of people can just make pancakes without looking up a recipe. That's what the food meta is. On top of recipes that we came here with a bunch of different foods from the European continent, or the Afro Eurasian continent if you want to be difficult. Some examples would be goats, sheep, cattle, pigs, plums, cherries, peaches, melons, apples, and most importantly, in my opinion, wheat. There's a lot you can make with those ingredients, especially considering that upon arriving here, we now had access to ingredients such as corn, beans, chilies, squash, I think, all kinds of different herbs, and a few meats like bison. The food meta didn't have to shift much to include these things. They were just added to existing recipes for the most part, until much later. I believe those are two of the main reasons that Canadians today do not have a lot of answers when asked, what are some Canada specific dishes? The most common answers I get, probably owing largely to our drunk and stoned populace, are poutine, Caesar cocktails, ketchup chips, Nanaimo bars, and the odd beaver tail. For anybody who doesn't know, we love to harvest the tails from beavers if they wander too close to an igloo, the only affordable housing remaining in Canada. They make for a delicious treat when pickled. Another big contributing factor I'd like to address is the apparent prejudice against colonial ethnicities in Canada, those being the French and English primarily. There's a lot of people that will laugh and say, oh no, we don't have any real culture here in Canada, like a fish that couldn't tell you what water is. I would caution against taking these people seriously. The examples I mentioned above, even if I hadn't mentioned intoxication, would usually conjure up mental images of frigid but bundled up snack runs to the gas station. I remember I used to walk downtown in Nanaimo over on Vancouver Island. I'd walk downtown to a Tim Hortons when I was probably 11 or 12 years old with a friend of mine who was the same age. We would go and he'd get a honey cruller and ice cap. I would usually get a Boston cream or an apple fritter in that ice cap. And then we would walk back up, again, middle of the night, just two kids in Nanaimo downtown, which is now a much less, let's just say there's a lot of tents there. We felt perfectly safe, perfectly fine. And whenever I go to Tim Hortons and get an ice cap and a curler, which isn't so often anymore, the quality's gone downhill, it always conjures up memories of going out for that midnight walk and then going back and playing more Halo 3 or Oblivion, the Elder Scrolls, with that good friend of mine. It's a really important part of my childhood, of who I am, to have that really deeply ingrained memory of how safe and peaceful this country was. Anyways, there's a few ways that food ties into culture. I believe the most important point is how our food causes us to relate to one another as Canadians, including those that came before us. If 80 years from now, a Canadian kid reads about how Grandpa used to play hockey in the beer league and then trudge through the snowy streets of Toronto to a local bar for some poutine with the guys, that kid would feel some inherent relation to his grandpa, even if he'd never met him. He would know, at least in some small way, this man who came before me was Canadian. Thus, a piece of the puzzle that is the Canadian identity is formed. This is a part of why culture is so hard to pin down and explain from an inside perspective. Without knowledge of other cultures to contrast and compare with your own, it can be difficult to see what makes us unique. This is why I have such a great dislike for Canadian food culture. We focus so little on our own foods and so much on foods from other places, as if you can have two cultures simultaneously. We tolerate low quality ingredients and cooking techniques because we do not actively take pride in and exemplify our own unique foods. When's the last time you made poutine at home? Maybe a nice tortilla? If you're from Vancouver Island, you should be eating seafood chowder almost every week, if not multiple times per week. It's nutritious, it's delicious, and it's a perfect representation of Vancouver Island, at least in a culinary sense. Why do you think Italian food or Indian food, but not Canadian food? It's perfectly fair to say, well, we live here. They don't call sushi Japanese food in Japan. They just call it sushi. Sure, yes, of course they do. That's all well and good. Now, go find me somebody that says Japan doesn't have a culture. Good luck. So many Canadians don't even know that our food often gets more respect in other countries than it does here. The Maple Leaf in London, the large number of Quebecois restaurants throughout France, the stuffed beaver in Sydney, Australia. Even Seoul in Korea had the Rocky Mountain Tavern for some time, that being the only restaurant in this list silly enough to disrespect us by grating cheese over gravy fries. They are permanently out of business. That's called disco fries, by the way, and if you order a poutine and it doesn't have squeaky cheese curds on it, just know that you've been lied to. If you're okay with the culinary ties between you and your fellow Canadians being low quality, prepared incorrectly, or just outright not existing, then please continue to not embrace your cultural heritage. In my case, I think I'll do the following. Fry the fries in beef tallow, toss them lightly in salt and fresh cheese curds, and then pour over a well-seasoned beef and or chicken gravy, then enjoy immediately. Please stop eating poutine out of waxed cardboard boxes. Nobody likes soggy fries. Even with gravy on them. It doesn't fix it. Anyways, this might all seem very pretentious. It is. If it seems pretentious to suggest that you should eat good food, you have low standards. I'm going to list off a few dishes that you could practice that, if made correctly, would impress people from any culture, showing them that Canada has a place in the culinary world, and also raising your own standards, hopefully. We've already talked about some dishes, but I'll list them here in order of difficulty. So, starting at the easiest and winding up at the more complex. Maybe not hard to make. I mean, poutine is very easy to make. It's just a bit dangerous, that's all. So, Nanaimo bars, Caesar cocktails, bannock, or the East Coast version, which is touton, pea meal bacon, which you can make homemade or just pick some up at the grocery store and put it on a breakfast sandwich. It's got a nice texture, and if you make it homemade, don't use too much curing salt. That can be bad for you. Tourtière, which is one of my favorite Canadian foods, probably my favorite Canadian food, and that's Tourtiere. It's a delicious, flaky beef pie. It's awesome. There's butter tarts, of course, and finally the famous poutine. The reason I list Nanaimo bars first and poutine last is that Nanaimo bars are a no-bake recipe that require very little equipment to make, and poutine requires deep frying, which is dangerous if done incorrectly. Make sure you have a fire extinguisher on hand. If I had my way, every person listening to this would look up one of those recipes, buy some ingredients, and invite some friends and family over to enjoy some good food and quality time together. Challenge each other to bring your best versions of Canadian foods to potlucks. Remember that being Canadian isn't just about living on a specific chunk of land under a highly questionable government. It's about who you and your people are in every facet of life. What you do for a living, what language you speak, which way you speak it, and how you break bread, or in this case, bannock. Thanks again for listening. I'm definitely going to go more into the specifics of Canadian foods and how some of these recipes relate to cultural periods during the formation of Canada as a distinct nation. For now, I'd like to thank those of you who gave me some feedback on previous episodes. I appreciate the compliments regarding sound quality. I've also been informed that I, in quotes, forgot cold-rated washer fluid, you idiot, end quote. So I'd like to remind everyone that on top of checking your coolant strength, you should also make sure that your washer fluid is the correct rating if you live in a cold region, which you probably do, so that you don't burst a reservoir line under your hood when the temperature drops. Regarding the Karens are an alarm system line, I've already got some concept art sketched out for the extremely profitable t-shirt line that I will release when I have more than 5 listeners. Now that I'm starting up regular uploads and my social media accounts are up, please feel free to share this podcast wherever you see fit. The social media links should be included with the podcast details. And I am planning on sort of crystallizing the, let's say, narrative of the podcast. I'm laying out each topic and writing out the ways that they relate to each other so that I can make this into a more cohesive listening experience. You can actually expect content and not just me raving about your soggy fries. I'd tell you to stay frosty, but I know that you don't have a choice in the matter, so good luck and see you next time.